I'm not suggesting Queen Camilla lacks authority, but that tiara isn't hers. It rightfully belongs to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, for the Christmas gala at Buckingham.
The envelope arrived at Windsor just after midnight. No ceremony, no announcement. Just a palisade, a sealed document, and a king who would read 5 pages that would rewrite the future of the British monarchy. By dawn, King Charles had made a decision that would wound the woman he loves, burden the son he's tried to protect, and force the crown to face a truth it has avoided for decades. This is not about scandal, it's about survival, and the cost of choosing the future over the past. Before we go further, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the stories the palace doesn't want you to hear. The file was marked confidential, senior review only. Charles opened it alone. No aides, no advisors, just the king and a truth he had been avoiding. Inside, polling data, public sentiment analysis, and a timeline the palace had commissioned in secret. The question it answered was simple. If something happened to Charles tomorrow, who would the country turn to? The answer was not the person standing beside him. It was the couple he had spent years preparing but never truly empowered. William and Catherin. The data was brutal. Public trust in the monarchy had fractured. Scandals, health concerns, and a generational divide had created a vacuum. And into that vacuum, the British people had already made their choice. They were looking to the future. Charles read every page twice, not because he doubted the findings, because he understood what they demanded. Princess Anne found him just before dawn. She didn't ask what he'd read. She could see it in his face. Her brother looked like a man who had just buried something he loved. Anne had always been the family's most unsentimental voice. While others calculated image and popularity, she calculated duty. And duty, she knew, did not care about feelings. She sat across from him. "You've known this was coming," she said. Charles nodded, then stopped waiting for permission. Anne had watched the monarchy bend under pressure before. She'd seen it fracture during Diana's death, during Andrew's disgrace, during Harry's departure. Each time, the institution survived. But survival, Anne understood, was not the same as strength. The crown needed more than survival. It needed certainty. And certainty, in this moment, had a name. 2 names. What Charles decided in those early hours was never meant to be public. It was a private recalibration of power, not a formal abdication, not a public declaration, but a deliberate, quiet shift in the monarchy's centre of gravity. He would remain king, but William and Catherine would become the visible future, now, not later. Key state events would centre them. Public-facing decisions would include them. The palace machinery would begin orienting around them as the emotional and symbolic heart of the royal family. It was a plan built on cold pragmatism, and it would devastate the one person who had stood beside him through everything. Queen Camilla had waited decades for her place beside the crown. She had endured public hatred, media cruelty, and the long shadow of a ghost she could never escape. When Charles finally became king, it felt like vindication. Not glory, just peace. But peace in a royal house is always temporary. The first sign came during a private dinner at Clarence's house. Charles was distant, distracted. When she asked him what was wrong, he said, "We'll talk soon." But soon never came. Instead, she began noticing the edges of her world quietly shrinking. Briefings she used to attend, no longer. Events she was scheduled for were reassigned. Questions directed to her office were redirected to William's. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel. It was simply an adjustment. And Camilla understood adjustments. She had spent her life adjusting. But this was different. This wasn't the public adjusting to her. This was the crown adjusting away from her. Anne knew the decision would leak. Royal secrets always do. So she did something unprecedented. She recorded a private conversation with Charles, not for scandal, but for clarity. In it, Charles admitted 3 things. 1, he feared his reign would be too short to stabilise the monarchy. 2, the public had already chosen William and Catherine as the future, whether the palace acknowledged it or not. 3, if he waited too long to prepare them, the transition could be chaotic, and chaos could destroy the institution. Anne kept the recording secure, but she also made sure certain people within the household knew it existed, not as leverage, as protection, because she knew that when the truth came out, people would accuse Charles of weakness, ambition, or cruelty. The recording would prove otherwise. It would show a king trying to save the crown, even at the cost of his own comfort. When Charles first approached William, the prince's response was immediate. No, not anger, not defiance. Just a quiet, firm refusal. William had spent his entire life preparing for the crown. But preparation and readiness are not the same thing. He had young children, a wife who had only recently returned to full public duties after her own health struggles, a life that for brief moments had almost felt normal. And now his father was asking him to step into a role that would devour all of that. Not yet, William said. Charles didn't argue. He simply asked his son to read the same file he had. William read it that night, and by morning his answer had changed. Not to yes, but to I understand. Catherin said nothing during the family meeting where the plan was discussed. She sat beside William, hands folded, face calm. But those who knew her well saw the tension in her posture. The Princess of Wales had never asked for the spotlight. She had accepted it, endured it, learned to navigate it. But this was different. This wasn't about being visible. It was about being necessary. The file had named her specifically, not just as William's wife, but as a stabilising force the public trusted in ways they no longer trusted the institution itself. Catherin had become the monarchy's most valuable asset. And assets, she knew, don't get to choose when they're deployed. After the meeting, she walked alone through the palace gardens. A senior aide later reported seeing her stop beside a fountain, staring at the water for several minutes. When she returned, her expression had shifted. Not acceptance, resolve. It happened 3 days later. A private dinner, just family. Charles, Camilla, Anne, William, and Catherin. The tension was immediate. Camilla had finally put the pieces together. The schedule changes, the redirection of duties, the way conversations seemed to pause when she entered a room. She waited until dessert was cleared. Then she looked directly at Charles. You're phasing me out. The room went silent. Charles started to respond, but Camilla raised a hand. Don't insult me with denials. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of years. I stood beside you when the world hated me. I rebuilt my reputation one humiliating day at a time. I earned this place. She looked at William and Catherin. And now you're giving it to them. Anne spoke first. This isn't about taking anything from you. Camilla's laugh was bitter. Then what would you call it? Charles finally answered. His voice was quiet, almost broken. Survival. Charles didn't justify it. He didn't defend. He simply explained. The monarchy, he said, was facing a crisis of faith. Not from scandal, not from money, from irrelevance. The British people no longer saw the crown as essential. They saw it as optional. And optional institutions don't survive. William and Catherin are not replacing you, Charles said. They're replacing the doubt. He looked at Camilla with something close to grief. I love you, but love isn't enough to save this. Camilla held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood and left the room. She didn't slam the door. She simply closed it. And somehow that was worse. The next morning, the palace released a statement. It was brief, carefully worded. It announced an expanded role for the Prince and Princess of Wales in representing the crown at major state functions. The media barely noticed. But inside the palace, everything changed. William's and Catherine's offices were relocated to the main state wing. Their security detail doubled. Their schedule was filled with events previously reserved for the king. It wasn't a coronation, but it was a crowning, nonetheless. William hated every second of it. Not because he didn't understand the necessity, because he understood it too well. He watched his father age under the weight of the crown. And now he was watching that same weight descend toward him and Catherin, years earlier than anyone had planned. One night, he told Catherin, I feel like we're being asked to bury him while he's still alive. Catherin took his hand. We're not burying him. We're holding the door open so he doesn't have to carry everything alone. William wanted to believe that. But belief and truth are not always the same. Camilla didn't fight. She didn't leak to the press. She didn't cause a scene. She simply withdrew. Publicly, she remained queen consort. Privately, she became a ghost in her own palace. She attended fewer events, spent more time at her private residence, declined interviews. Charles visited her often, but the visits grew shorter, the conversations are quieter. And eventually, both of them stopped pretending this was temporary. 3 months after the shift began, Anne requested a private meeting with William. They met in a drawing room at Kensington Palace. Anne didn't waste time. You need to understand something, she said. What Charles did, it wasn't cruelty, it was mercy. William frowned. Anne continued. He could have waited until he was too ill, too weak, or too dead for this transition to be smooth. And then you and Catherin would have inherited a monarchy in chaos. She leaned forward. He gave you time. Don't waste it mourning what this cost. Use it to make sure it wasn't for nothing. William nodded, but Anne wasn't finished. And one more thing. She handed him a flash drive. This is the recording of my conversation with Charles, the one where he explained why he made this decision. William stared at it. When the time comes, and it will, when people question whether this was right, play this, let them hear him, let them understand. And history and time would remember him not for how long he reigned, but for knowing when to let go. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. The Crown's greatest secrets are always the ones hidden in plain sight, and we'll keep uncovering them.